Rain hammered the cracked asphalt like a drumbeat of fury, turning the dimly lit streets into mirrors of chaos. Inside the small, worn-down kitchen, Mrs. Elena Torres pressed her trembling hands against the counter, staring at the phone like it had become a lifeline and a weapon. The voice on the other end wasn't just cold, it was poisonous, crawling into her bones like frost. "Listen carefully," the officer had said, every word dripping with menace. "If your son opens his mouth, if you say one thing to anyone, you'll regret it." Elena's heart thudded violently, a rhythm that felt louder than the storm outside. Her chest tightened as she imagined the consequences, her son's face flashing in her mind, bright eyes, innocent laughter, the way he tucked his favorite action figure under his arm before bed. How could someone in uniform, someone sworn to protect, twist the law into a weapon of terror? She clenched the phone so tightly her knuckles whitened. Her kitchen, once a place of warmth and laughter, now felt like a cage. Every shadow in the room seemed to whisper threats. The fear that had been simmering in her soul for years, the sleepless nights, the whispered arguments, the subtle bruises her son tried to hide, now erupted into full-blown panic. Outside, the city was oblivious. Cars swished through puddles, umbrellas bowed under the rain, and neon signs flickered like indifferent eyes. But Elena knew something they didn't: danger had a face, and it wore a badge. She had tried to be silent, to endure, to protect her child the only way she could, by hiding, by hoping. But tonight, hope felt like a fragile thread in a storm, ready to snap. Then, a sound, faint at first, like a distant heartbeat, then a roar that made her windows tremble. Engines. Hundreds of them. A tide of chrome and leather that moved not for destruction, but for justice. And somewhere deep inside, a spark ignited, a defiance she hadn't felt in years. Maybe she wasn't alone anymore. Elena Torres hadn't always been trapped in fear. A decade ago, she had been a single mother with dreams as bright as her son's smile. She worked long hours at the local diner, balancing plates and bills with the grace of someone who refused to let life break her spirit. Her son, Mateo, was everything: curious, kind, and unrelentingly brave for a boy his age. But life had a way of testing the strongest hearts. One night, a routine trip to the park changed everything. Mateo had witnessed something he shouldn't have: an illegal deal, a corrupt officer covering tracks, a secret that put him squarely in the crosshairs of someone with power and zero conscience. From that moment, the subtle cracks in their lives became chasms. Mateo came home with unexplained bruises and a quietness that gnawed at Elena's soul. Teachers noticed his sudden withdrawal, neighbors whispered about troubled times, and the world seemed to shrink around them. Elena tried to shield him, tried to fight quietly through the channels she thought were safe, but every time she went to the police, the same walls stared back at her. No justice. Only warnings. The officer, Detective Harris, had made it clear: speaking out would cost them. At first, it was small threats, whispers in hallways, a car idling too long outside their house. Then, it escalated. Calls at midnight, notes slipped under the door, shadowy figures watching from the corners of dim streets. Elena's life became a careful choreography of hiding and pretending, a constant vigilance to protect Mateo from a predator who wore a badge and a smile. Despite the fear, Elena refused to break. She learned to read signs, to anticipate danger, to hide Mateo's pain even from herself. Every night, she would lie awake listening to his soft breathing, counting the steady rhythm that reminded her he was still here, still alive, still hers. But the world had grown too small for them. Mateo's laughter, once the soundtrack of their tiny apartment, had faded under the weight of fear. Elena's motherly instinct burned like a torch in the dark. She knew she couldn't fight this battle alone, yet she didn't know where to turn. Every trusted hand had turned away. Every legal path seemed blocked. And that's when she heard the distant roar of engines, hundreds of them, rolling through the city streets like a tidal wave. Bikers who weren't bound by bureaucracy, who answered to a higher code of justice. Word had spread through whispers and community channels: these riders protected those who couldn't protect themselves. They were relentless, loyal, and unafraid of authority. For the first time in months, Elena allowed herself to imagine a world where fear didn't rule, where justice wasn't just a word in a letterhead. A world where her son could walk outside without looking over his shoulder. But could a group of bikers really take on a corrupt officer inside his own station? Could courage really fight fear so directly? The answer would come crashing down tonight, shattering silence, fear, and lies in a storm of roaring engines and unwavering justice. Detective Harris didn't just sense fear, he thrived on it. Each day, he escalated the pressure on Elena and Mateo, turning their lives into a battlefield of intimidation. Phone calls came at odd hours, their content edged with venom. You're running out of time, one slip, and you'll regret it. Your son will pay the price for your silence. At school, Mateo's anxiety grew. Teachers noticed his reluctance to speak, his constant glances over the shoulder, the way he flinched at the smallest sounds. Every day felt like walking through a minefield, knowing one misstep could trigger consequences they weren't prepared for. Elena tried to fight back within the confines of the law, filing complaints, appealing to superiors, seeking guidance, but the system was rigged. Harris had allies, connections woven through the very departments meant to protect citizens. Every attempt to expose him crumbled before it even began. Courtrooms were indifferent, calls went unanswered, emails vanished into digital voids. The tension inside their small apartment grew unbearable. Shadows seemed to stretch longer, corners darker, every knock at the door more menacing than the last. Elena noticed small things she hadn't before, a car parked too long down the block, a shadow that lingered just a moment too long, a knock that echoed in the quiet night. Fear had evolved into a constant companion, whispering in every moment that they were trapped. Mateo, once brave and playful, now stayed close to his mother's side, refusing to go out unless absolutely necessary. The boy's small shoulders bore invisible weight, his laughter now a rare, fragile thing. Elena's heart ached as she watched him shrink under the invisible claws of the lawman who had sworn to protect him. Yet, just as despair threatened to consume them completely, faint rumbles began to resonate in the distance. First, a low hum that could be mistaken for thunder. Then a rhythmic cadence that seemed almost alive, deliberate, unyielding. Engines. Hundreds of them. Each rumble carried a promise, they were coming, and they wouldn't stop for anyone standing in the way of justice. In that moment, fear and hope collided. Elena's chest tightened with both terror and anticipation. Harris could tighten his grip all he wanted, but something unstoppable was on its way, a force that didn't answer to fear, a wave that wouldn't be turned back. The police station sat at the edge of the city like a fortress of concrete and steel, its windows glowing under fluorescent light, its doors guarded by men who thought they owned the night. Inside, Detective Harris leaned back in his chair, confident, smirking, convinced he had stamped out every spark of resistance Elena might hold. But outside, the air began to tremble. At first, it was faint, an echo rolling over the wet streets like the distant call of a storm. Then it grew, louder, deeper, more primal. A wall of sound that made the ground itself shudder. The city's heartbeat was being rewritten, not by fear, but by thunder. Engines. Not one. Not 10. 200. Headlights appeared at the far end of the avenue, piercing through the rain. Rows upon rows of chrome beasts advanced with unity, each rider clad in leather, steel, and purpose. They rode shoulder to shoulder, a moving wall of defiance, their presence painting fire across the dark city. Storefront lights flickered as if bowing to their arrival. Pedestrians froze, umbrellas trembling in their hands, as they realized this was no ordinary procession, it was an army. At the front rode their leader, a broad figure with a scar across his cheek and a gaze like stone. His engine roared louder than the rest, but it wasn't the machine that commanded respect, it was the unshakable aura of justice that seemed to radiate from him. His jacket bore the crest of their brotherhood, a symbol that whispered of loyalty, honor, and the promise to defend the voiceless. As they approached the station, bikers lined the street, stretching block after block. Tires hissed against the wet pavement as the roar reached a crescendo, rattling windows and shaking the very foundation of the building where Harris thought he was untouchable. Inside, officers exchanged nervous glances. Phones buzzed. Radios crackled. No one had prepared for this. 200 bikers, united in purpose, had surrounded the very heart of their power. Elena stood in the shadows across the street, clutching Mateo's hand. Her breath caught in her chest, her eyes wide, tears mixing with raindrops on her cheeks. For the first time, she felt the crushing loneliness lift. These men, strangers, had come not for vengeance, but for her. For Mateo. For truth. The leader raised a gloved hand, and instantly, 200 engines fell silent. The sudden quiet was deafening, heavier than any roar. The city itself seemed to hold its breath. And then he spoke, his voice carrying like a battle cry. No mother gets threatened. Not on our watch. The bikers dismounted in unison, boots hitting the ground with a rhythm that matched the storm's fury. Their unity wasn't just in sound, it was in spirit. They were brothers bound not by blood, but by choice. And tonight, their choice was justice. Every eye turned toward the station. Every heart beat with the same unyielding demand. The walls that had silenced Elena for so long were about to tremble under the weight of a truth too loud to be buried. Detective Harris's smug grin faltered when the first set of boots pounded against the police station floor. He rose from his chair, straightening his badge as if its shine could shield him. Officers crowded behind desks, whispering nervously, watching the glass doors shake as heavy raindrops and heavier footsteps merged in a rhythm of inevitability. The doors burst open. 200 bikers stood in the rain-soaked night, their leather jackets glistening, their eyes burning with defiance. The leader, broad-shouldered, scar cutting across his cheek, stepped forward. The silence inside the station was suffocating, broken only by the dripping of rainwater from their coats. You think a badge gives you the right to threaten a mother? The leader's voice thundered, echoing off sterile walls. You think a child's fear is just another tool to keep your secrets buried? Harris forced a chuckle, though his jaw was tight. This is trespassing. You'll all be arrested before the night's over. But no one moved to cuff them. Even the officers who had once bowed to Harris's power looked uneasy. The bikers weren't criminals storming the station, they were justice incarnate, the physical embodiment of a truth too dangerous to ignore. Elena stepped inside, holding Mateo's trembling hand. The boy clung to her, wide eyes darting between the bikers and the man who had haunted his dreams. The room seemed to still, time bending as a mother and child finally confronted the monster behind the uniform. Harris sneered. You think parading a gang into my station changes anything? She's just some desperate woman. Her son's a liar. A biker slammed a folder onto the nearest desk, photographs, statements, recordings. Every piece of evidence Harris had tried to bury now lay exposed beneath flickering fluorescent light. Gasps rippled through the room as officers saw what had been hidden, proof of corruption, abuse, and intimidation. You buried the truth, the leader growled, stepping closer. But tonight, we dig it up. Mateo, his small voice trembling yet resolute, suddenly spoke. You can't scare us anymore. The room froze. Harris's smirk vanished, replaced with a flash of rage, but the bikers stepped closer, forming a wall between the boy and his predator. The leader's gaze never wavered. Look around you, Harris. 200 brothers stand here, and not one will let you touch this child again. For the first time, the detective felt something he had never known in his own kingdom of shadows, fear. His badge was nothing in the face of overwhelming unity. His words crumbled as the bikers advanced, not with violence, but with presence, an unstoppable force of truth pressing him into a corner. Phones were recording. Officers who had once stayed silent now raised their heads, realizing the tides had shifted. Harris's reign of intimidation was unraveling before their eyes. His voice cracked as he shouted for order, but no one listened. His threats rang hollow. Finally, the leader turned to Elena. Say the words you've been forced to bury. Her voice shook, but it carried, filling the station with a strength born of years of suffering. Detective Harris threatened my son. He used his badge to silence us. But we are not afraid anymore. The bikers erupted, their unified roar shaking the walls like thunder. Harris stumbled back, surrounded, stripped not by fists but by truth and the power of those who refused to let him win. By the time higher authorities arrived, Harris was no longer the predator, he was prey, trapped beneath the crushing weight of evidence, witnesses, and a community that had found its courage. For Elena and Mateo, the nightmare was finally breaking. And for Harris, the station that had once been his fortress had become his prison. The storm outside had softened to a gentle drizzle by the time Elena and Mateo stepped out of the station. The night air felt different, lighter, freer, as if the city itself had exhaled after holding its breath for too long. Mateo clutched his mother's hand, his small fingers no longer trembling. For the first time in months, his shoulders weren't weighed down by invisible chains. He looked up at her and whispered, "Are we safe now, Mama?" Elena's eyes brimmed with tears, but this time they weren't born of fear. She knelt, brushing damp curls from his forehead. "Yes, Mijo. We're safe." Her voice cracked, but it carried a truth she finally believed. Behind them, 200 bikers stood in silence, their leather jackets glistening under street lamps, their engines waiting like loyal sentinels. The leader gave Elena a respectful nod, his scarred face softened by something deeper than words. "No one touches your family again. Not while we ride." She placed a hand over her heart, unable to speak through the lump in her throat. Mateo, braver now, lifted his hand in a small wave toward the bikers. A ripple of smiles broke across hardened faces, men who had seen too much of the world but still found purpose in protecting innocence. Engines roared to life, one after another, until the entire street pulsed with their thunder. Neighbors peeked from windows, witnesses to the moment when fear was dethroned by solidarity. The bikers didn't linger for glory, they weren't there for applause. They rode not for recognition, but for something pure, justice for the voiceless. As the last of the tail lights disappeared into the horizon, Elena held Mateo close. The nightmare was over, but the memory of the night 200 strangers became their guardians would never fade. And somewhere deep within her, a spark lit anew, proof that even in the darkest nights, heroes sometimes ride on two wheels. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe for more powerful biker hero stories that prove justice still lives among us.